Emergency. Paging Dr. Beat.
Doctor, give me the news.
Welcome to A Third Opinion with Paul Rodgers and Bob Weldon. Here's the truth about the latest wellness findings in medical news, options and protocols you might not know about. These guys lay it out for you. Straightforward information important to you. And you can always be a part of the show. Call now, 407-774-8255. 407-774-TALK. It's time to get A Third Opinion on News Talk 660 WORL. Here's Paul and Bob.
Well, good morning, and welcome to A Third Opinion. I'm Paul Rodgers, your host. My co-host is Bob Weldon. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, Orlando. Great show today.
We are ready, willing, and able. Bob is, just so our listeners know, Bob is a certified nutritional consultant who earned his nutritional consultant certification from the American Association of Nutritional Consultants, the AANC. Bob has been active in nutraceutical sales and executive organization management for over 15 years, and Bob is currently the Director of Wellness and Nutrition at the Zellner Institute of Integrative Medicine. Statements made on our program have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This is A Third Opinion, the crucible of truth about the war that's been declared by various federal and state regulatory agencies on companies and families that produce dietary and nutritional supplements and natural food products, and also on certain medical practitioners who offer complementary procedures and protocols that have been proven to be successful in improving the health of their patients, but which are often banned by the aforementioned regulatory agencies. Each week, we'll be exposing the chicanery, the hypocrisy, the corruption, and the more than occasional KGB-like tactics that these agencies sometimes employ in their continuous efforts to maintain control by suppression of life-changing information that would advantage you, my fellow American citizens, at the expense of the advantage presently enjoyed by the big pharmaceutical companies and the politicians and bureaucrats they support. We encourage your participation in today's program, and our call-in number is 407-774-8255. Bob, what's on the agenda today?
Well, Paul, we have a great show today, and I know you gave that FDA disclaimer at the beginning, and we're going to be talking about the FDA quite a bit today in the next 2 hours.
That's why the statements on this program have not been approved.
And after they hear this program, they definitely won't be approving.
Well, we're not throwing the FDA completely under the bus. They do offer and supply a very, very needed function. But I think that there are many instances, and we're going to cite them every week, where they're totally out of whack and they've overstepped the boundaries, especially where natural food products and procedures, for example, at an integrative medical practice are concerned.
Right, and this has been a passion of mine for about 20 years. This has been an ongoing battle in this industry, and we're going to be talking about, you and I have been kind of morphing this program to this point where we really have got our focus honed down. And I'm really hoping that the general public pays close attention to the things we're going to bring to the table here for them to think about, because it concerns every citizen of the United States that's concerned about their health. There is actually a war on our health going on. You and I were talking earlier. I watched Dr. Oz the other night, and he actually used that term. He said there's a war on our health. Well, who's conducting this war on our health? And unfortunately, it's this overburdensome regulation that we have in this country in the 21st century when it comes to our personal choices of our own body, what we need to do for ourselves. And we're going to talk about a lot of the hypocrisy, the conflicts of interest that are going on, and we're going to have a call to action for people who are concerned about this to get involved with this, because it really, if they knew what the government is up to when it comes to, as you mentioned, the dietary supplements, nutritional, functional foods, that even food, they want to categorize in some cases as a drug.
Yeah, there's a bill now that's going to be proposed, I'm told, in the U.S. Congress that you would have to get you, our listeners, would have to get a prescription from a doctor to get vitamins. Vitamins.
Right.
This is nuts.
Yeah, it's really crazy.
The whole thing is nuts. Now, the FDA, yes, they perform really, really valuable functions, but they've gone completely over the side. And by the way, Here's something else maybe the public doesn't know. The FDA budget for this year is $4.5 billion. That's with a B. That's a lot of zeros with a 4.5 in front. $4.5 billion. 40% of that money is paid to them by the big pharmaceutical companies in the form of fees. But I don't care what the form of it is, and I don't care what you describe the payment as. It's support of the FDA by the big pharmaceutical companies. Now, do you think, for a minute, that they're giving the FDA that money without expecting something in return?
No, and this is something that my son always says to me, which is very, very true. You just have to follow the money.
Follow the money.
You know, where is the money involved in this big industry, big pharma? And again, we've said this on the show many times, Paul. We're not anti-pharmaceutical. And in the practice that I work in and with doctors I work with, I don't know any doctors that are really anti-pharmaceutical when there's a need for those. And let's give them credit where credit is due. They've come up with some really wonderful pharmaceutical drugs that have changed disease states. But when we think about the FDA and we think about big pharma, they're in bed together, and this is not a good thing. When it comes to this category that we're talking about, your right to be able to choose treatments for yourself that you want to have. You've done your homework.
The pharmaceutical companies shouldn't be paying for the FDA. That should come out of
Absolutely
our tax.
Not.
The FDA is supposed to represent the citizens of the United States, and so as a citizen of the United States, I think part of my tax money ought to go to fund the FDA, but they should get no funding from the big pharmaceutical companies because it opens the door for under-the-table stuff, and being human, some of that's going to happen. I don't know where, I don't know when, I can't specifically tell you, but my study of human nature for 7 decades tells me that some of that stuff is going to happen. Doesn't need to. The funding for the FDA should come exclusively from the United States government.
That's right, tax dollars.
Not directly paid to them.
Because they do protect our food source.
Well, and that's what they're supposed
the
to.
Food
We like
and
that.
Drug Administration. But we don't want to get too far off where we're talking about things that you and I really aren't experts in this case. But in the case of nutritional supplementation, there's some major things that the government is trying to do to actually control what we ingest. Now, we want them to protect us, but on this program, we're only going to be talking about things, products, functional foods themselves that are based on peer-reviewed, evidence-based research
and clinical studies.
So we're not talking snake oil.
No, snake oil is snake oil. Everybody agrees with that, and I'm not one that's going to say, "Oh yes, FDA, go ahead and approve snake oil." No, and they won't do it, and they shouldn't. But there's a lot of stuff that's going on. Products that are out there that you, our listeners, can take and use as natural food products, beautifully researched. Millions of dollars of research has gone into these products, and the FDA won't let the company on their own website.
Right.
They will not allow those companies to cite their own research.
You're right. They can't even have a link to another page.
I'm starting to talk loud now.
Okay, that's all right.
I'm
Don't
going
get
to
too excited. Got a long show
down,
here.
Paul. Slow down.
But here's the thing, in the marketing of nutritional supplements, there's lots of companies. There's health food stores. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's true. There's scammers, and there's claims that are made that are not backed up by any research and even any clinical data. And what we wanted, the difference between us and some of these companies is going to be we're always going to talk about only the things that the companies themselves can't talk about for fear of the FDA and the FTC getting involved in their business, shutting them down, rating them. We're going to talk about some of those things. Maybe people don't even know are taking place in this country just with food, for crying out loud.
I'd be interested in knowing what our listeners are thinking as they're hearing us say this, because we're not saying anything that isn't certifiable.
You can get on the internet and find this.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And we have a guest, which we believe is going to call us around 10:30, who is he's the leading lawyer who has taken these guys to task on several occasions and won in federal court. His name is Jonathan Emord. And Jonathan has agreed, thankfully, to join us at 10:30, and I'm pleased to announce.
You don't want to miss that.
No, and I it's a Saturday, and I hope he didn't forget, which I don't think he will. But it's going to be enlightening, very enlightening, and that's what what our program is all about. We want to bring facts to our fellow
That's it.
American citizens.
The crucible of truth.
The crucible of
okay,
truth.
Truth being the key operative word there. And these are going to be things that we've researched, and anybody can do this. We're nothing special. We're just going to condense it down into a format that you can kind of ingest all of it at the same time. But anybody could go through the internet and go to all sorts of sources to find this information out. And a lot of people might think, well, there's no big deal. But if you want to have the freedom to make a choice,
well, yes, there's
for
a big
medical
deal.
treatment,
Yes, there's a big deal.
You're taking your supplements that they've constantly tried to say don't benefit people. We're gonna pull the curtain back on that.
Well, if the supplements don't benefit people, what's Dr. Oz saying on a daily basis?
Of course.
I mean, you watch Dr. Oz. He's all about natural foods. Now, he doesn't sell
Dr.
anything,
Weil, but I mean, they're all in this industry to help look at a different way of us taking care of our health, and it's based on food. It's based on food
because there are different ways. There are different ways. Traditional medicine, wonderful. We have the greatest doctors and research organizations, medically speaking, in this country of any place in the world, the best. And they're wonderful. And I have huge admiration for our medical people, our doctors and our practitioners.
Listen, Paul, the doctors have a real difficult time. You and I have talked about that.
They can't say anything either.
We've had doctors on here, Dr. Zellner. We've had some other professionals on the air. In fact, I'm constantly talking to doctors. A lot of doctors still are in fear of doing certain treatments that are food-based, functional-based supplements in their practice because of lawsuits. And not so much that the FDA is going to come and kick their door, and although that's a possibility depending on what type of treatments they're doing. That's happened, and we'll cite some of those that people may not be aware of.
That's not nice.
But we're talking about things that work, and doctors have validated them, used them, and clinically we've seen results. I personally, working in a practice, see the results of this type of medicine, this integrative functional medicine that works for patients, and there's no side effects.
Bob, we started our a year ago working together, a little bit less than a year ago, and as you said earlier, we've been talking about doing this program for almost all of that time, and so I'm very thrilled to death that we're finally have embarked down this road, because it's going to be very informational, and we're not going to cite anything that we can't back with facts. And we welcome you to A Third Opinion. Coming up on a break, we'll be back on the other side.
660 WORL.
We're back with A Third Opinion. Welcome to the Crucible of Truth. We're here to bring you facts about proven, life-enhancing dietary supplements and natural foods, and how our government, in cahoots with big pharmaceutical companies and the politicians and bureaucrats that support them, intentionally suppress potential life-enhancing information that the bad guys don't want you to have. What would you think if you knew that big pharmaceutical companies are trying to make vitamins and other natural nutritional supplements available only as a doctor's prescription? Yeah, really. They're talking about that.
Well,
up
Big
in
Pharma
DC.
wants to control it.
It's time you got your back up and joined us in the fight, folks. Give us a call and let's talk. Our call-in number is 407-774-8255. I'm Paul Rodgers. My co-host is Bob Weldon, and Bob, we've reached this point after a year, so that we're kind of taking the gloves off and let's go for it.
Let's do it. Let's
tell people what's really going on, because, and I would really advise our listeners to get a very small, you can go up to Lowe's and get a very small fire extinguisher to keep next to you, because
your hair is going to be set on fire.
We're going to tell you stuff that's going to set your hair on fire. You are going to be saying, "No, I don't believe that." You're going to say, "No, that's not going on," but it is.
We're going to point things out, but we're also going to give you some avenues for solutions that you can get active in. I want to give a website.
No bomb throwing on this show.
That's right.
We just don't throw bombs.
I want to give you a website. Everybody should write this down. It's lef.org. And the gentleman that's going to be on the next segment there's a video there. If you go, that's lifeextensionfoundation.org or lef.org. On the very front page, scroll down to Consumer News, and you will or Consumer Alerts, I should say. You'll see a little video there. It says War on Health.
It's the first item under the heading of Consumer Alerts, which is down the middle of the page.
It's awesome, and it's a 57-minute documentary that will just blow your mind. And these are all MDs, incredible people on here talking about this issue that we're talking about today, this war on your health and what's going on with the government, the FDA, the FTC. and the supplement industry and the functional food and even just raw milk and food sources, walnuts and tart cherries and all the problems that these industries are having.
Muscadine grapeseed products.
Excuse me. So I want you to go there, and then right under there is another link that says Take Action, okay, where you can actually go to another site and sign up on that. Become a petition. Really, it's a petition.
You'll be alerting your congressman or your senator about a bill that is.
We're trying to get a bill. There's trying to co-sponsor. The LEF is helping with this. It's HR 1364, and it's really the Free Speech About Science Act. And what that's all about, Paul, is what we're going to be talking about in this show.
Bob, think about that title. We have to have a bill passed by our federal government so that we can have free speech about science.
So let's give an example, Paul, about that. When we're talking about this show.
Sure.
You mentioned Nature's Pearl, a product you and I are familiar with, a product that we actually use in our practice. And the reason we use it in the practice is because of the research.
Now, this is a company up from North Carolina that some of our listeners have heard about, I'm sure. It's a company from North Carolina. They have a product that is made from
muscadine grapes.
The seeds of the muscadine grape. That's all it has in it. It's 100% natural. It's not much different except in the presentation because they're ground. The seeds are ground up a little bit and they're in a little gel cap. But it isn't any different than if you grabbed a handful of them and ate them yourself. That's what's in the product. They've spent millions, $20 million of studies, clinical research studies at Wake Forest University Medical Sciences.
The number 3 biomedical research
top 5
facility
in the country, one of the best in the world. And they have all this certified information, and they're not allowed to put it on their own website.
They can't even link to the research. And when they first opened this company, of course, we got involved because of the research. With breast cancer on the rise, all these major cancers, here's something preventative a person can do based on the research. And what we want to point out to listening audience, this is viable, peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled, the best research you can get. We're not talking testimonial or stories of people getting results. Those are great.
Clinical research.
This is major research. It's published, okay? You can find it. That means it can be duplicated somewhere else. This research can be duplicated by someone else using this muscadine seed and the inhibition of cancer growth in the laboratory on about 7 or 8 of the major cancers that we're facing out there. So the reason we think this is important is people are always asking us, what can I do for some prevention? I don't want to wait till I get a diagnosis. And, most doctors tell you we have a disease. This is the disease management. It's called managed care. What are they managing? They're managing people's disease they already have. So people are more informed now. You mentioned Dr. Oz and other programs that are out there. People are getting informed on the Internet, and they're saying, hey, why not look at some functional things, some food sources, some supplements that might give my body an added advantage to defend itself in this toxic, crazy world that we live in.
The program, one of the programs that Dr. Oz had in the last few days was all about antioxidants, which is not a very complicated topic, but there he was, and he did a whole hour on antioxidants. He had other doctors on and some other medical practitioners. It was fascinating.
Right.
It's really great to watch. And we have to remember, Dr. Oz doesn't sell anything. He's not selling products.
No.
He's just
and that's what's
telling
good
it
about
like
his
it
show.
is. We have a caller. We have a caller from Columbia, South Carolina. Ernie, welcome to the program.
Hey, Paul, Bob, I hope you're having a wonderful day. God bless you for shining a light of truth. Just in case any of your listeners think that you're overstating the case, that they're trying to shut down folks that produce items that help us that are natural. About 10 years ago, and I don't know exactly how long ago, I was buying apricot seeds from an outfit out in California, and you grind them up and you eat them. It produces just enough arsenic to take on the free radicals, but not enough to hurt the normal cell. And, of course, the scare was, if you remember the play years ago,
Arsenic and Old Lace,
yeah. Where 3 prisoners killed their hostess by feeding her apricot seeds. I took them for 2 years, every day, ground them up, and I called out to the order, and they said, Ernie, they shut us down. I said, how? They said, they shut us down. So
That happens.
Well, they must have deemed that they must have decided that the apricot seeds were snake oil. That can be the only reason.
And they always admitted, it produces a little arsenic, so a lot of things produce a lot of things, but
there's arsenic in a lot of foods. There are traces of arsenic in a lot of foods.
Sure, rice. The big scare with rice recently.
Yeah,
with arsenic.
You recall that, Ernie? A couple of years ago, there was a big scare about arsenic in rice.
Yes.
Doesn't seem to bother a billion Chinese, but what are you going to do? I don't know.
And Artie, the problem with these things, and I'm not really familiar with this particular product, but the product with these, this is what we're trying to separate on this program, is the fact is that, okay, if there's some really substantiated evidence of the efficacy of a ingredient or a product or a supplement, and we're not talking about, well, I took this and I got some great results. We're talking about science-based that's been clinically tested, and of course, safety first with everything, and that's really what the FDA should be doing. So if they've shut that down, there's been, maybe the company was making medical claims that was unsubstantiated, and I tell you, we're all for that because it's a personal choice for you to take that, and if you got some results, that's true.
All it was an apricot seed. That's all
right.
It was. You grind them up, you eat them.
Did you have to grind them up?
Was the company producing them?
They just said, a bag of apricot seeds.
And were they making health claims? Were they making?
Nope.
Yeah, that's where they generally get in trouble, is they make these claims. And as we were talking about with the Nature's Pearl product, and we'll talk about some other products as well, when there is research, they can't put that on their website or any of their literature. This is why we want people to think about. The fact is, well, you have the right to be able to make a decision, but you cannot make decisions if you do not have all the facts or if you don't have the resources to make those decisions. Now, you obviously made a decision to take these apricot seeds for some reason, right? You were convinced of it, and that is your personal right. But
and if it's an apricot seed, who cares?
Right, and that was it. It was a food. They said, this is good for you. It's a natural food. God made it. It may or may not have any big effect on, but I mean, they didn't go over the top with the claims. All they said was it produces enough arsenic to take on free radicals.
Well, Ernie, in the next segment of our show, we've got a top lawyer on the program that I think you're going to be interested to hear from, and we're going to shed a lot more light on all this. I do appreciate your call.
No problem.
Thanks, Ernie.
And you have a great day. Thank you, sir. See what I'm talking about, Bob? It's just crazy. It's crazy. You can't do this? Why?
Well,
now, if it's something that's proven to be bad, that's different.
And this is where the Food and Drug Administration should come into play. I agree.
Of course.
If there's something that's harming people or making claims, they should. But if it's evidence-based and been tested, to be safe, really that should be a personal decision for the individual to make based on the research and what's proven clinically to be so.
I'm Paul Rodgers. My broadcast co-host is Bob Weldon. This is A Third Opinion. We are the crucible of truth, and we will be back.
.660 WORL.
Welcome back to A Third Opinion. I'm Paul Rodgers. My broadcast co-host is Bob Weldon. Bob, welcome back. We are the crucible of truth. One of the goals of our program is to take to task the misguided media and those unbridled federal and state agencies whose purpose is to censor proven, peer-reviewed clinical research that accrues to the benefit of the big pharmaceutical companies, or I should say, it is against the benefit of the big pharmaceutical companies and those that they support. What if you knew that your government was suppressing information about potential life-saving medical studies just because big pharmaceutical companies wanted them to? Well, if you're unhappy with that thought, you'll love our program, A Third Opinion, and we solicit your input. We're honored to have as our guest Mr. Jonathan W. Emord, an attorney who practices constitutional and administrative law, and he is really at the top of this field. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
And you're calling me today from?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, you're in Washington. Mr. Emord is a columnist, a lecturer, and an author of 4 books and many articles on issues of constitutional law and politics. He represents food and dietary supplement manufacturers, physicians who practice integrative medicine, and nonprofit groups, and is the only non-scientist board member of the Certification Board for Nutrition Specialists. Mr. Emord, I'd like you to meet my broadcast partner, Bob Weldon.
Good morning, Jonathan. Glad to have you on, honored to have you on here today, and I hope you're going to be able to help us to enlighten our audience with some of the issues that we're facing in this industry and the battles that we have to do with the FDA and the FTC. If you would just help us to appreciate what you're involved in and your focus when it comes to this topic.
Well, I practice constitutional and administrative law before the federal courts and agencies, and I have a particular interest and involvement in representing clients before the Food and Drug Administration have for the last 20 years. And sadly, that experience is one of exposing you to various forms of corruption within the agency that manifests itself in decisions that have significant impact on the American consumer.
I know you're on, and we're promoting this web movie that's on at Life Extension. You can find it on the laf.org, and I've watched that video that you're on throughout, and it's quite an eye opener, even for myself, who has been in this industry for about 20 years. And one of the key points that stuck out to me is that the big pharma spends about $6 million a day on lobbyists. And so we know the lobbyist problems that we have with other industries. But what can the general public do, Jonathan, to kind of counteract it? It seems like it's sort of an insurmountable problem. You mentioned corruption, and of course, I don't think anybody has a hard time believing that.
Well, unfortunately, there's very little that the public can do because the pharmaceutical industry, which is in essence a state-sponsored monopoly, has tremendous suasion over members of Congress and the FDA commissioner. People don't quite understand that the FDA is a dictatorship in all respects because it has one person, the FDA commissioner, who makes all essential decisions that govern the agency. And that person is a political appointee, not elected. And as is the case with the entire federal government, as I explain in my book, The Rise of Tyranny, the government, 9/10 of all federal law, is no longer the product of those you elect, but rather it's the product of the unelected heads of these agencies, thus transforming what the Constitution was designed to create, a limited federal republic, into an unlimited bureaucratic oligarchy. It's rather shocking, and one of the profound effects occurs when an institution like the Food and Drug Administration regulates a quarter of the entire American economy, all foods, all drugs, all dietary supplements, all medical devices, all biologics. And that has an extraordinary impact upon what is available to consumers and what may be said concerning the products that they regulate, because they also regulate very severely the content that is communicated.
It's amazing to see how these bureaus grow, Jonathan. It reminds me of an unlimited amount of water being poured on an unlimited-sized flat cement parking lot. And these bureaus just spread and spread, and new regulations. The Congress doesn't know about it, or they do and don't do anything about it. And it's out of control. It's just completely out of control.
Well,
and it's very, very frustrating because, quote unquote, that just ain't American.
That's right. We've lost our country as it was known at the time of the founding of the Republic and all the way up until the 20th century. We've lost a country to an unlimited bureaucratic oligarchy. These people rule. When 9/10 of all law is not coming out of Congress, but is coming out of the unelected heads of these agencies who have no accountability to the American public and virtually none to Congress or the courts, you really do have a frightening circumstance, and we are there. We are run by an oligarchy, not by an elected republic. And people, they're frustrated because they'll elect someone who they think may have an ability to roll back government regulation, reduce the welfare state, and help us turn towards a balanced budget. And then they find that those people are effectively incapable of doing anything in office because the real power has been delegated away by Congress to these agencies. And that process of delegation used to be held unconstitutional prior to the late 1930s. But in the late 1930s, following what was known as the switch in time that saved 9, when 9 justices of the Supreme Court changed their votes in favor of expansion of government under the threat of the Roosevelt administration's court packing plan. From that point forward, not a single delegation of congressional power to these agencies has been held unconstitutional under the non-delegation doctrine. And as a result, there's been no restraint on the growth of the bureaucracy.
It reminds me, what you're talking about reminds me of what I believed was the case in the Soviet Union. That whole country was run that way. And there was a whole bunch of folks running around, standing in lines, waiting to get the second shoe from a pair of baby shoes, which they got the left one last week. They're going to get the right one this week. But the guys that were in the government were living like kings. Well,
there are tremendous parallels. I mean, and also to the American Revolution. The Revolution came about because the King of England had virtually unbridled power and was violating the rights of the colonists, and they were fed up with the rights violations and insisted on a return to a government that was responsive and that was a protector of individual liberty first and foremost. And what has happened is that government they created has been transformed into one that, again, grants virtually unbridled discretion to these kings who sit atop these agencies, who reign over specific market sectors and produce a reign of terror. The corruption, as we can discuss about within the FDA, is all too common in this situation because you have unelected people who are appointed, who are answerable to no one, but who choose winners and losers in the market, and based upon those choices will determine their post-government employment. So if you play your cards right when you're in these politically appointed positions, you can have a very lucrative future after you leave the government because you will be rewarded handsomely for favoring one industry player over another. And that's what happens whether it's the Federal Communications Commission or the Food and Drug Administration or the EPA. It really doesn't matter. But unfortunately with the FDA, it means a direct impact upon health, and it can mean that the government is countenancing or tolerating or condoning the loss of human life, as was the case with Vioxx, where even though the government was fully aware because its medical reviewers were screaming that the FDA should revoke the right of Merck to market Vioxx, the FDA commissioner refused to do so. Lester Crawford refused to do so, and he condoned what was 160,000 heart attacks and roughly 60,000 deaths from those heart attacks, all the while the agency's medical reviewers were predicting that very heart toxicity that would lead to those.
Why wasn't he arrested and charged with murder?
A very good question, because government is immune from suit, and government officials are immune from suit. Under a twisted interpretation of the 13th Amendment, sovereign immunity is granted to government to protect both the agencies and the individual actors from being sued directly.
Well, we need an amendment that protects the sovereignness of the American public to be able to step in and do something about this. This is incredible. This is incredible stuff, Jonathan.
The profound change at root that has taken place is that at the time of the founding of the Republic and forward, up to the 20th century, the individual was sovereign and government was the individual's servant. That is now reversed. We are now the servant of the government. The government has become sovereign.
Wow. And so when it comes to the FDA, and I know we want to talk about this in the next segment a little bit further, the FDA and the FTC, and where it comes to really a lot of our focus here is the right to choose, an individual to choose certain medical treatments that the FDA frowns upon or actually outlaws, and particularly when it comes to nutritional and functional foods that have been well researched, and the research is documented. We'd like you to, if you could, address the problem some of these companies face when they want to put out this information and let the general public make an informed decision, should or should I not use this when it's not a drug. I know Big Pharma has a big role in this, and they're trying to really capitalize on the fact that the FDA is in bed with them. And I want you, if you would, Jonathan, when we come back from this break, if you would help us to really flesh that out and address that so that the general public knows what we're trying to accomplish here on this program.
You're listening to A Third Opinion. We're live on 660 WORL in Orlando, Florida. Our telephone number is 407-774-8255. Our guest is Mr. Jonathan W. Emord, a magnificently successful, smart, brilliant attorney who's an author of 4 books and knows a lot about the topics that we are going to be discussing each week on A Third Opinion. 407-774-8255 if you would like to speak with Mr. Emord. And we'll be back after the break.
660 WORL.
Welcome back to A Third Opinion. We are the Crucible of Truth, and our guest is Mr. Jonathan Emord, a magnificently successful attorney who practices constitutional and administrative law. I've known Jonathan for many, many years. He's a terrific guy. He has written 4 books. He's now busy doing constitutional stuff, really basically helping the nutritional supplement companies and the integrative practitioners who run afoul of the rules and regulations of the FDA and other federal regulatory bodies. Our telephone number is 407-774-8255 if you'd like to ask a question. Jonathan, welcome back to the program.
You're glad to be here.
I'm thrilled that you are, my friend. Bob?
Yes, Jonathan, before the break, we were trying to set up this segment where you could help our listening audience understand the problems that a lot of efficacious products have getting to market and tying in real research with some of these ingredients and functional foods and actually the supplements themselves. I know you've been involved in that to a great deal, and maybe our listening audience just doesn't appreciate how complicated this is when it comes to the FDA and the FTC, by the way.
Well, this is really an example of successful lobbying. That is the statutory regime that governs the FDA is functioning under it, Congress's regard towards it. It's an example of very successful lobbying that has occurred early in this 20th century, in the 1930s, and progressed forward by the drug industry, particularly after World War II and then by the Kefauver-Harris amendments in the late 60s. The drug industry really had become the captive owner of the FDA and had put Congress at bay on questions that relate to FDA involvement in the drug industry and a collusive sort of relationship there. What we have is a classic anti-competitive regime propped up by government action. And the reason why truth does not govern and why science does not govern, but rather politics governs in the decision over what drugs should be in the market and what can be said about drugs, foods, and other things, is precisely because the whole regime is designed to reinforce the primacy and the market exclusivity of FDA-approved drugs. Now, 3 things very quickly. One, in order for you to communicate any therapeutic information, regardless of whether it is demonstrably true or not, you must get FDA pre-approval. There's an absolute prior restraint in existence, grossly in violation of the First Amendment, but has been maintained by the courts and by the Congress, by the FDA, that prohibits any company from selling any product in the marketplace with a claim that it may treat disease, express or implied, unless FDA has pre-approved the substance as a drug and has authorized the claim. Now, this has a profound effect because over the last 45 years, there's been an extraordinary outpouring in the scientific literature of evidence about the therapeutic effects of nutrients in foods and in dietary supplements, as well as an incredible growth in the market for alternative medicine and for means of treating disease that do not follow the classic paradigm of I give you this drug, you have symptoms, your symptoms go away, and you heal yourself of your disease, or that sort of allopathic model. So the FDA defends the allopathic model, defends the drug regime, denies anyone the right to communicate any information in the market in competition with it, and is ruthless in its enforcement against those parties. As a result, if you look at the history of employment of these political appointees at the agency, when they leave the agency, they usually land at very lucrative positions, oftentimes having positions on the board of directors of various drug companies or positions as faculty in chairs that are paid for by the drug industry. And they live like kings and queens after they do their service.
The public be damned.
That's right. A very good example of that is Vioxx, but I might mention a couple of examples. This is not just me interpreting what's going on here. The FDA's own medical reviewers have gone in a train of one after another over to Congress complaining as whistleblowers that the corruption is so extraordinary, and yet Congress does nothing. Let me give you just a few examples. The FDA's own Associate Director of the Office of Drug Safety, he's there now, Dr. David Graham, said this about FDA. FDA is inherently biased in favor of the pharmaceutical industry. It views industry as its client, whose interests it must represent and advance. It views its primary mission as approving as many drugs as it can, regardless of whether the drugs are safe or needed. And then...
It's a wonder he wasn't drawn and quartered.
Well, he was. Actually, he was ostracized, and were it not for Senator Charles Grassley's very vigorous efforts to protect him, he would have suffered the fate that many of these medical reviewers did, which is being ostracized, having their reputations destroyed, and then unceremoniously leaving the agency and finding it very difficult to get employment anywhere once they leave. Here's another one. Dr. Ronald Kavanaugh is an FDA medical reviewer. He says, there is irrefutable evidence that managers at CDER, that's the Center for Drug Evaluation Research, have placed the nation at risk by corrupting the evaluation of drugs and by interfering with our ability to ensure the safety and efficacy of drugs. While I was at FDA, drug reviewers were clearly told not to question drug companies and that our job was to approve drugs. Now, this approval game, you might say, well, how can you play favorites when you have an approval process? Couldn't any drug company participate? Well, no. There's a prescription drug user fee that's charged along with other fees in order to play this game, and it's over $1 million. You've got to have $1 million just to file an application with the FDA. The application requirements require that you have performed testing oftentimes for as long as a decade, and you have to have some of the most expensive clinical trials done. Meanwhile, once you get past that hurdle, it's really a joke. The review process, a lot of people don't realize this, but at FDA, the FDA does not do any independent testing of any drugs it approves. So it relies entirely on the submission made by the drug company.
Oh, beautiful.
If the drug company, which is an obvious conflict of interest, if the drug company has safety data that is suspect but characterizes it in the right way, the FDA frequently ignores it. And FDA will not question the safety of a drug unless the sponsor of the drug raises a safety issue. And when it comes to, they focus instead on efficacy, but efficacy is a joke in this sense. Rather than focus on benefit, that is, if you take this drug, will it cure this disease? FDA focuses on what it defines as efficacy, which is there a sign or symptom of the disease that is affected by the drug? So let's say that you are successful in reducing, let's say, elevated blood pressure, but let's say there's no direct association between that and the treatment of cardiovascular disease. The drug may be approved and may be approved with recommendations for its use in people with cardiovascular disease, even though it may have absolutely no benefit.
In fact, might even have some side effects that could be detrimental.
Oh, man, what a mess.
And I can give you a good example of this. In the case of Avandia is a type 2 diabetes drug. And Avandia was approved by FDA, even though there was evidence that Avandia was unsafe when compared with other drugs for the same condition. And Avandia was shown to have heart toxicity. And then the Congress got involved, and the Congress did an investigation. And during that investigation, they found correspondence going from the sponsor of Avandia to the FDA and back to the sponsor, in which the sponsor succeeded in communicating to the FDA its displeasure that a medical reviewer was calling into question the drug safety, and asked the FDA commissioner, the head of the Center for Drug Evaluation Research, to reassign that person. And so they cabined that person, and they put in a new person who found no problem with the drug. Panels for the review of drugs are chosen by the FDA, principally by action with the FDA commissioner. And these people are chosen based on the prediction of how they'll vote.
And aren't a lot of them also from the pharma industry to begin with?
They have a routine process of waiving conflicts of interest. The FDA puts people on there with known conflicts of interest. They waive the conflicts, and then they vote predictably in favor of the drugs. These people, there's been much criticism of this process, but there's been virtually no change to it. Congress has these whistleblowers before them, and they complain chronically about FDA approval of unsafe drugs, manipulation of the process, suppression of science critical of the drugs, ostracization of those who are medical reviewers who call into question drug safety. The Congress hears this over and over again, and in the end does absolutely nothing in response to it. No,
we're coming up on a break, Jonathan. I want to submit to you, however, a new name for a political entity. It's called a rubber stampocracy. I mean, this is shocking. I hope that by now our listeners' socks are rolling up and down their legs. This is just unbelievable. Our guest is Jonathan Emord. This is A Third Opinion. We are the Crucible of Truth. We'll be back on the other side of the news with more truth.